Today, our three guest speakers will describe the SB programs and their states. This information is meant to highlight similarities, differences, and lessons learned from years of working in SB. Our first speaker is Sara J. Johnson. Since 2008, Sara has served as the Small Business Ombudswoman, Small Business Technical Assistance Program Manager at the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. Sara currently is the Region 1 Rep for the National Steering Committee and Chair of Promotional Subcommittee. Past NSC positions include Co-Chair of Technical Subcommittee, Chair of Annual Planning Subcommittee, Vice Chair and Chair of the National Steering Committee. Prior to SBO, SB-TAP role, Sara was the Pollution Prevention Program Manager for 8 years. As P2 Manager, she served on the National Pollution Prevention Roundtable Board of Directors, revitalized the P2 Tribal Work Group, and concentrated on measurement techniques. While living in North Carolina, she was an environmental laboratory manager and technician specializing in wastewater analysis. Sara has a Master's of Science from Antioch, New England Graduate School in New Hampshire and a Bachelor of Science from Coastal Carolina University in South Carolina. Welcome, Sara.
Thank you so much, Lynelle. My name is Sara Johnson, and I have been working in the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services for 20 years. In those 20 years, I have conducted hundreds of site visits to facilities to provide compliance assistance and pollution prevention suggestions. Auto body shops, auto salvage yards, marinas, hospitals, dental offices, veterinarian clinics, circuit board manufacturers, a wooden casket maker, which was one of my favorites, furniture refinishers, metal fabricators and finishers, and a few I can't mention due to military contracts. After 20 years, I am a little jaded. I've had some stories that will, well, just make you shake your head in dismay. I have been threatened, I've been lied to, I have been denied access, and been into some scary situations we left due to safety concerns. But I also have some great clients that call me back. At a couple of my repeat clients, they have coffee and donuts waiting for me. I get Christmas cards, funny emails, and thank you messages. Site visits can be the best part of this job. I have been to almost every town in the state, and I know where all the Dunkin' Donuts are located. Scheduling site visits depends on what type of request or referral that is received. If a small business contacts me, then I make an appointment. My favorite is when a new business is getting ready to open, but they want to make sure they're doing everything right. We also have a pre-application process. Businesses can go online and set up an appointment with DES and with DES staff. I'm usually invited to those meetings if it's a small business. If it was a complaint referral, I usually don't make an appointment because I want to catch them in the act. Most of the referrals are for spray painting, either outside or odor complaints from the neighbors. I also get compliance referrals, either from a hazardous waste or air staff refer a small business to me to help them with compliance. Our goal is to provide assistance to small businesses first. If they work with me and get into compliance, no enforcement is necessary. If not, then the referral and complaint goes back to the program that gave me the referral to determine next steps. As for priorities, every June I meet with air staff, including enforcement, compliance, and permitting. We decide on what the SB-TAP work plan will be that will dictate my outreach efforts. We also discuss any compliance referral trends or if a compliance referral process can be improved. This year, we are working on streamlining our regulated toxic air pollutant complaints. I give small businesses multiple tries to give me the information that is needed to complete a compliance determination. Unfortunately, I give them 6 months and they still don't provide what I need. So we did a lean event and created a new standard operating procedure, and now my timeline is 30 days. It's working about 50% of the time. It is helping me prioritize my time to work with small businesses that want my help and spending less time with small businesses that are ignoring me and our regulations. In 2008, we were hosting a fugitive dust workshop for DPW crews, landscapers, and contractors. After this workshop, I will be tasked to visit these sites with air compliance staff. The businesses will have the opportunity to work with me to improve compliance. New Hampshire Small Business Technical Assistance Program has always been multimedia, even though it's 100% funded by Title V fees. A few years ago, I was the Compliance Assurance Co-Coordinator for DES. We hosted training to all DS inspectors and other staff to cross-train on other media 3 times a year. The training included safety during inspections, who to contact at DES if you see something that is not your expertise but you think could be a problem, or a sector-specific project like an auto salvage yard. By training inspectors to see beyond their silos, we hope to share the workload. Just like other states, our dwindling resources are not going to improve, and the knowledge and experience we lose with every retirement is a little frightening at times. Prior to site visits, I do a lot of research. New Hampshire has a lot of information online through our one-stop database. One-stop has hazardous waste manifest, air permits, wetland permits, UST registrations, etc. It's very easy to search and gives me a pretty good idea of what I should see at a site visit. We also have an enforcement database to find any history at a site or a business or a specific business owner. But it should be noted that SB tap history is not included in one-stop. We are still confidential if a small business contacts me. This is not the same as a complaint. The letter that I send to the site is also sent to compliance staff, but they do not share those letters to the public. My predecessor had 18 years as the SBO, and he visited hundreds of sites. His files carry a lot of history, so I always do a search in those files prior to a visit. But they are alphabetically by company name. I can't search by address. My project this year is to create a GIS layer with all the addresses of the site visits. Each layer will have a different icon, whether it was an auto body shop or someplace I visited or someplace that Rudy had visited. The sites I visited will have a link to an electronic file. This GIS layer will only be seen by the SBTAP and P2 since we are both offered confidential assistance and we do many of our site visits together. At DES, we encourage some basic safety tips. Try not to go alone. It's always good to have a second set of eyes. Tell someone in the office where you are going and when you expect to return. If you feel uneasy for any reason and your intuition is telling you to leave, you need to honor that feeling and leave. As I said before, I had been threatened and felt concerned for my safety. One time, my coworker and I visited an auto body shop and immediately knew something was off with the owner. We left very quickly and followed up with our special investigations section at DES. They called the local police and there was a history with the owner. Less than a week later, the auto body owner was in jail. You should always wear personal protective equipment. I have steel-toe boots, safety glasses, hard hat, and ear protection, all paid by Title V fees. I keep my safety glasses and my boots as a prompt to not forget them. I know I can get them at some of the sites we visit, but they are not usually available at auto body shops and other mom and pop sites. And the steel-toe boots have protected me from potential snake bites while walking around auto salvage yards. Training is offered at DES every few years or so. If training is offered at your department for inspectors or other on-site personnel, take advantage of it. DES includes training on how to de-escalate a situation, park your car facing out to the road, and protecting yourself for ticks. Lyme disease is very real in New Hampshire. We take it very seriously. My 17-year-old daughter has been suffering from symptoms since she was 11 from her tick bite, and we will continue to take a handful of medication and supplements every day to reduce her ills. When you arrive at a site, you need to first start with earning trust. Many of the reasons I am at a site is because someone filed a complaint against them. The owners are already on edge and nervous and don't always want to let you in the building or provide any information. I try to find common ground. Usually you can find something on the wall that might help, like a sports team, a restored vehicle photo, or other hobbies. I remember one time a guy would not let me in until he noticed my nail polish. Seriously, this was a big guy at an auto repair shop, but he was also a certified nail technician. After we talked about my nail polish, he let me in the door. Once you are done with introductions and in the door, we do a check-in with the company. What do they want us to look at? Are there specific questions they have? The site visit starts at the loading dock, and we walk through the process from start to finish. While walking around, I'm looking for housekeeping issues, trash barrels, open floor drains, unmarked containers, and lighting. Energy efficiency opportunities are referred to our pollution prevention program. I am watching to see what is happening or not happening. We ask questions, we ask why, we ask where, etc. A recent visit, we saw over 10 ovens turned on, yet no one was using them. Why do you turn them on? It's in the procedure. Why? In case a job needs one of the ovens. Why? Always done like that. How much energy are you wasting? Answers, a lot. They are looking into fixing this procedure. This never came out during our prior meetings or discussions. The site visit found the issue and now a potential cost savings. I do have a checklist for New Hampshire auto body shops. New Hampshire does not have conditionally exempt for hazardous waste, so every auto body shop is a hazardous waste generator and must notify and manage the waste accordingly. The waste in question is the gun cleaning solvent, which is a listed hazardous waste F003 or F005, depending on the solvent. This is an ongoing disagreement with some of my shops. They want to let the waste solvent evaporate, which you can't because that is considered treatment, and treatment of a hazardous waste is prohibited. Or they spray it in the air, also prohibited. We do take some photos during the site visit. We ask permission to take them. We use them to help us understand the process and to help us remember later when writing the report. This is also crucial during complaint investigations. I can include a photo in the letter of what they need to clean or fix or label. And they can send me their photos of things that they have corrected, like installing a stack. Just last week, I was all giddy because my auto body shop installed a stack. This makes things so much easier to comply with regulated toxic air pollutant requirements. Record keeping goes from calculating annual emissions to just keeping purchasing records. Some site visits, I know the sector very well, and other sites I am clueless, but asking questions and asking more questions, and usually we can figure out what needs to be done. After the site visit, then the paperwork train begins. But first, if there is anything that needs to be taken care of immediately, I won't leave the site until it is done. This has happened where I was concerned for the safety of them or their worker safety. One time, an asphalt mill operator told his employee to turn off the air pollution control device since it was slowing down production. Yeah, he said that in front of me with my DES logo on my coat. This was a very difficult conversation with the owner. I was there at the request of Air Compliance to provide them with assistance, but it was pretty obvious that assistance wasn't going to help this operation. I left the site and gave the referral back to compliance, and it was sent immediately to enforcement. I usually send a letter prioritizing their tasks and a timeline. I also ask that they get informed by joining a trade association or at least getting on our email list for rule changes. The letter is also referred back to the town. We are working on connecting the dots between state and local code enforcement officers and fire chiefs. If it was a complaint and the site does not follow up with me within 30 days, it is returned to the compliance where they tried to get the site to work with them. If not, it goes to enforcement. My really good small businesses want us to even the playing field, and we are trying to do that. I keep track of the 30 days using my task on Outlook. I use tasks for a lot of things. It's a great tool if you haven't utilized it. I would recommend trying it. If the site visit was the request of a small business, they still receive a letter, but no timeline for compliance. They do go in my database and files, but will remain confidential. If a complaint comes out later, the file remains closed and compliance cannot use my file as proof that the site knew what they needed to do. This situation only happened once, and the site provided my letter to the inspector, which is the right of the owner to do so. The inspector then requested that I work with the site again to finish the compliance items. It all worked out, no fines, and case was closed. New Hampshire DES has a measure tracking and reporting system, which is an Oracle database. The site visit and a little write-up is added to the system. This database is what I use for the NSC annual report. I set it up, my deliverables, to match the report. Well, I try to. This year, I switched to a balanced scorecard. It's a very interesting system to track metrics. It is still in a DES database, but it's just organized a little differently. If you're interested in balanced scorecard information, you can contact me on it. That's pretty much it. I am a one-person program. I've been doing it this way for 6 years. I usually complete anywhere from 12 to 15 site visits a year. They are very time-consuming, but they can be the most rewarding. And thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I was looking through chat to see if anyone had any questions, and I didn't see any. Does anybody have any right now that they would like to ask Sarah? Raise your hand. Oh. All right, our next speaker is Jenna Lat. Jenna works for the California Air Resources Board and has spent the past 4 years in the Office of the Small Business Ombudsman, though she recently transferred to the In-Use Compliance and Evaluation section. Jenna was the Region 9 rep for NSC and a member of Technical Subcommittee. She also revitalized the Region 9 Working Group, increasing participation of Arizona and Nevada in NSC. While with Ombudsman, Jenna was the lead on developing small business compliance assistance tools with a focus on short-lived climate pollutants and air toxics. Her work has led limited English-speaking owners of ethnic grocery stores to better understand how to report for the refrigerant management rule and to detect leaky refrigeration systems. She has worked in air quality for over the past 28 years. Ms. Latt holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Chemical Engineering from UCLA. Welcome, Jenna.
Thank you, Lynelle, and thanks, Sara. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, wherever you are. So right off the bat, I want to say that I actually have never been threatened, fortunately. And my only dangerous situation was when I was climbing a rickety ladder. Want to climb that. She's not going to want to climb that ladder, so we're going to give her this challenge. But I did climb it successfully, and luckily I'm not afraid of heights. So just to give you a little bit of background on our program, so we began our compliance assistant site visits back in 2014, right around the time I was hired. And really, we were guided by the compliance assistance deadline, which was upcoming at the time of March 1st, 2016 for small refrigeration systems. And we categorize small as between 50 pounds charge of refrigerant and 200 pounds. And the idea was that we thought that the small systems were primarily owned by small businesses, and our program staff here at CARB is located up in Sacramento, and I was really their only connection down to the Los Angeles region. And so the idea was, go out to some of these independent grocery stores and see if they're registered, and if they're not, help them get registered. And so really our focus again was on these grocery stores and sometimes some cold storage places. And so unlike Sara, I conducted unscheduled confidential visits, and I told them up front, that everything we do is confidential. We're from the Small Business Environmental Assistance Program, and we're not connected with the enforcement, and we want to be here to help you come into compliance. So our initial observations were that these grocery stores had not been regulated by CARB before. They often didn't know who CARB was, because at our agency we focus on mobile sources as well as climate change, and less so because we have delegated permitting authority to the 35 local air districts. So they might not be familiar with CARB. If they were familiar, they might not have been familiar with our regulation at all, or the compliance deadlines. Initially, they were a little hesitant to let me into their site, and so what I did is when I first started the visits, I'd come in and I'd say, "Hi, I'm Jenna Lat. I'm from the California Air Resources Board, and I'd like to talk to the manager." And they'd hem and haw, and then they would say, "The manager's not in." So that wasn't effective. So the next time I came in, I would just say, "Hi, I'm Jenna Lat. I'm from the state of California. I had my badge," and I said, "I'd like to look at your refrigeration equipment." And I started walking towards the back of the store, because I knew their equipment would be upstairs in the mechanical room, and that was very persuasive. So that always worked. And then I understood that they had a short amount of time, and so I had to be able to communicate with them very quickly. Sometimes there were language barriers, so really we were finding out a lot of information by doing these site visits. but the main thing that we noticed was that everybody responded well to this one-on-one compliance assistance. Once they realized that they were covered by the regulation and they were out of compliance, well, they appreciated the fact that we were here to help them get into compliance. And so that was sort of a feather in the cap. So as we were walking back towards their equipment, I had to develop, a 15-second concise explanation and kind of hand them this card, which you can see there. It's a small card and it says, is your regulation, is your business registered? And I told them about the program. It's a registration program, leak inspection, usually quarterly or annually, and then an annual reporting and payment of a fee to CARB, so that they understood. And here's another little a little card that we give them on the right hand side, where it says, repair leaks within 14 days, conduct leak inspections, and keep records on site. And this and then this other page talked about, the types of systems that were covered, either you're a small, medium, or large. Another thing that we noticed was oftentimes these were ethnic grocery stores. We have a varied population down here in Los Angeles, large diversity. And we have Vietnamese stores, we have Chinese markets, we have Mexican markets or Latino markets. So we wanted to, one thing that we did when we came back is, we need more multilingual materials. So we prepared these. And then once we got up to their equipment, and I started, I showed them how to read the nameplate of their equipment. Often they would have 4 or 5 different refrigeration systems, and so for each system they needed to record this information. So basically, it was a tutorial that I was doing. How do you read the nameplate, and what information do you need to record in order to then take downstairs and input into CARB's database once they set up an account. And so I'd show them, here's the model year, the manufacturer, the model number, serial number, and then the refrigerant type, which was really key, because although you'd think that the refrigerant type would be uniform throughout the store, that was not the case. So teaching them, where to find the refrigerant type. And then the other key one was, what is the system charge? And often that you could find that on the nameplate. If we couldn't, all the stores use service providers, so we were able to call them on the phone and ask them questions. Also determining whether it was a low temperature system, a high temperature system. So basically teaching them how to get information on their equipment. Other stuff that they needed was the tax ID number. But when we first started doing these compliance visits, we didn't have this form that you see on the right hand side, and so we didn't have anything that correlated with what we're requesting in the database. So we went back and we created this form to make it easier. And I think initially our program staff thought that they didn't need to have a paper form because we didn't want to have clients send in paper forms to the agency, but we quickly found out that that is a deterrent to compliance. So we went back to the drawing board and created this form for them, and found a lot of success with it. So getting started with the compliance assistance visit, can you show me your refrigeration equipment, was very effective, helping them ID the equipment. Oftentimes I would take pictures of their nameplates and the equipment, guiding them through the process, which I'll talk about. Once we collected the information in the mechanical room, the manager of the store often had me work with his accountant, because the accountant was the one who had access to the computer. So being flexible to work with different people within the store was very important too, and helping them, being patient with them and setting up a username and a password to get into the system. And and also collecting information on their invoices. So these are all things that I did with them. So this is on the left-hand side is our R3 database, and you can see there's a username and a password, and I help them set up an account online. And then once they set up the account, they're required to go through this pretty lengthy database data entry process. And so you can see there's different tabs, one for the facility information, refrigeration system, ADL is the automatic leak detection, they didn't have that, and then leak inspection, they have to file an annual report, which basically was summing up the amount of refrigerant that was added in the year, and then paying a fee that was $170. So really taking them through each step of these tabs. And showing them how to do this for their system. And the idea was to is to help them through the tabs so that at the end of the visit, they were 100% into compliance, including paying the fee and doing the reporting. And I would say that I was successful about 50% of the time. I got better and better when I did these site visits at having them be 100% into compliance. One of the things that we wanted to emphasize with our visit is this correlation that that as part of the regulation, doing the leak inspections, that doing a leak inspection was important because you find where a leak is sooner than just, you know, the alternative. What a lot of the stores were doing is when the refrigeration cases start increasing temperature, they're losing product. That's when they call in their service provider, and by that time they may have leaked, you know, 50% of the charge. So by following the regulation and doing a leak inspection, you know, quarterly, then you're going to find your leak sooner, and then you're going to repair it sooner, and you're going to be leaking less refrigerant. And so as we went into the invoices and looked at it, oftentimes, you know, we saw people who had I think in the last slide I showed, there in one leak there was 250 pounds of refrigerant that was lost. And when you tell them, oh yeah, you know, look at what you paid here on your invoice, you paid, you know, $5,000 because refrigerant is $25 a pound, you know, you're wasting this money. And so by physically showing them their own records, they're like, oh my gosh, yeah, that is getting expensive. So making these correlations for them. The other piece is, you know, in the regulation, we purposely didn't define how to do a leak inspection because we didn't expect a lot of the stores to be wanting to do their own leak inspections, but by being in the field, we determined that they did want to do leak inspections on their own, and they were interested in buying, you know, a leak detection device. So we went back and we talked to program staff and we developed how to do a leak inspection. And we put together a checklist, and then we also worked with the service provider, big service provider out here in LA, and did a video so that they could learn how to do a leak inspection. And that, you know, was very helpful for stores that wanted to do it on their own, because it is costly to have to put together a contract with the service provider. And lastly, we put together a leak inspection and repair form. And again, you know, the program staff wanted to stay away from having paper goods, but we realized that paper forms, but we realized that the service provider wasn't always collecting all the data that that CARB was requiring in our database, and so key pieces of information were missing. So as an example, we require the EPA technicians, the technician's EPA certification number. Excuse me, and they didn't have that. So that might have been an impediment to completing compliance. And so we'd call their service provider on the phone and say, hey, what was Dave's certificate number? Another thing that we educated them on was that the leak inspection, although during the leak repair they did a leak inspection in order to find where the leak was, the service provider wasn't writing down in the form that a leak inspection was conducted. And that was the key of our whole program, was that they need to demonstrate that they did a leak inspection. Well, if they didn't put it on the invoice, then they're not going to get credit for that, and they're going to be out of compliance. So that was really key. As you can see right here, there's a box, check that you did a leak inspection, that you did the leak repair, what was the date of service, was a leak detected, yes or no. So this was another tool that we developed to make sure that they were collecting, that the service provider was collecting, or the store was collecting the data that they needed to have in order to be into compliance. Another piece was having something for the service provider, because CARB was depending on service providers to educate the stores on our program, but oftentimes the service providers weren't familiar with our reg, so we had this flyer made up to educate them on the program. So this is my last slide, and some of the takeaways, as I mentioned before, the goal was to get the client into compliance on the first site visit. Sometimes it wasn't possible, so we'd call them on the phone to remind them that, yeah, your compliance date is coming up. This is the data you need. Sometimes they would say, can you come back out again? And since it was so close, we did come back out. Teaching them how to use the R3 database. Some people had varied computer expertise, so once we taught them, they were ready to go. Sometimes I had another guy call me the following year and said, oh, can you just come by and help me again? I said, sure. And it made sure that he was in compliance. Also, we were able to create valuable relationships with the grocery stores on what was working and what wasn't working. We also created relationships with service providers, and this was really important for our small business environmental assistance program in working with the program staff who is writing the regs, because as they're amending the regs, we want to make sure that what they're asking for isn't outlandish, and understand what problems that we're having in the field. So again, we've created these really good relationships to do, as well as to do case studies. So I think that we've had a lot of success, and on in 2014 and 2015, I would say I conducted about 30 to 40 visits per year. So with that, if we have any questions.
And it looks like we do have a few questions, Jenna.
Okay, I just have to figure out how to stop share.
Oh,
all right.
You could have left it up for the time being, but I'm not sure if this question was for you or Sarah, but it might have been for you. What resources did you use to identify your language needs for the projects? Was that Sarah's question? Because there was some right at the end of hers that...
So, well, I discussed the language needs. I think that initially, just going out to the stores, I realized, that we had a large Vietnamese population here in the San Gabriel Valley. We just speaking with the store, often the people in the store spoke, limited English, and their service provider actually spoke Vietnamese. And so we realized, okay, we need Vietnamese material, we need Chinese material, just based on the site visits, and we need materials in Spanish, we need Korean materials, and then we have people here at CARB who are bilingual and certified, and so they were able to translate for us.
That was going to be my next question. What resource did you use to do the translations? But it's excellent that you had resources right there in your resources board. A next question for you is or it could be for everyone, participants, or if you might know, is California the only state with state refrigerant regulations? It seems like here in Kansas, we only go by the federal reg. We don't have any state-specific regulations.
Yeah, that's right. California is the only state that has these specific regulations. Some of them overlap with the 608 regulations. And so, but we have our program, we differ in the sense that we require more frequent leak detections. We also require for really large systems to have the automatic leak detectors, and we also require mandatory reporting to CARB, which I think the federal regulation doesn't require. um, and repair, it's 14 days, and I think the feds have a longer time period.
Great. Did your clients identify other grocers to visit? Did people?
Yeah, mostly not, but one person said, "Oh, how come you're focusing on me? You know, we have some other competitors down the street. How come you're not over there?" And I would say, "Oh, actually, I just visited them as well." So there was that too.
Sometimes we see that in this line of work, don't we?
Yeah.
Especially on the enforcement side, anyway. Maybe not so much on the consultation side.
Yeah.
But
The other thing we did on the site visits is we did a lot of training of the program staff. So because I came from the consulting world where I did site visits just as part of my job, so it was really easy for me to bring this over to the state when I came on. And so we did a lot of training for program staff in Sacramento, and as a result, they developed their own program, and they just pretty much mirrored ours, but they were able to go out to other areas within California. And we also introduced like having a little kit that I call it a kit, but it's really just a tote bag, and it has a flashlight and ear protection, safety goggles, as well as lots of different flyers, my boots, my safety, my state shirt, a flashlight, gloves, because there's a lot of dirty equipment, and paper towels. So having this kit, so when you go out into the field, you just grab your tote bag and you're ready to go. And then they use that too.
as part of that kit, do you? Someone had a question about there are leak detectors for the PERC dry cleaner use. Does CARB provide you with one, or
yes, yeah. They do. The program staff did give me a leak detector that I could bring into stores.
How about, I'm going to go a little further with that question, just out of curiosity. Does CARB provide like rental monitors or leak detectors that people can come in and borrow and use and then bring back, or?
No, not really. I never had that question before. They have their service provider. Their service provider would help them out. You can do like a bubble test where you use a solution, and if it's bubbling, then you can tell, or even just a visual test where if oil's on the floor, that's indication of a leak. But we didn't get too heavily into leak inspection because there was so much to do already, and that it would just be, it already was taking, each visit took about 2 to 3 hours, so it was already time consuming.
And one final question that we had on your presentation is, what was the fee for? Also, can we see a copy of the video for leak detection? Is that available on the CARB training website?
Yeah. I'll finish. I'll put the web address on my slides, but we do have it online. And then the fee was let's see. I'm trying to think what the fee is for. I can't remember what we're using the fee for.
Okay.
But it's not my program. So we have program staff who develop the regs, and then our program, the Small Business Environmental Assistance Program, wouldn't get involved in that. Our visits are free.
Great. Well, thanks, Jenna. That was a lot of great information about what CARB does and the services that you guys provide.
You're welcome.
Our next speaker is Mark Stoddard from Indiana Department of Environmental Management. Mark Stoddard worked briefly for the Indiana State Board of Health prior to his transition to the newly formed Indiana Department of Environmental Management in 1986. Prior to state government, he worked a little over 4 years with the Indianapolis Department of Public Works at the Belmont Wastewater Treatment Plant. He has been working with individuals or groups for over 22 years to educate and to promote environmental compliance and excellence. CTAP assistance is both voluntary and confidential. Challenges for Mark include communicating clearly and succinctly while keeping as current as possible with environmental regulations. Another challenge is establishing and maintaining credibility in an ever-changing and regulatory environment. He must network both internally and externally to maintain that credibility. Mr. Stoddard holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Chemical Engineering from Rose-Hulman. Welcome, Mark. Do we have you accidentally muted, Mark? No, there you are. I can hear you.
Okay, so that's good. Do you see my presentation?
I do. You're up on the screen. It looks like are you at the beginning of your presentation? Yes, okay.
Correct.
All right.
I would like to thank Jenna and Sara for their presentations. It was most informative. That kind of serves as a lead-in. I have come to my position this time and date of my life based on not so much what I've done, but the places I've visited, the people I've known. And I wish I could say that I could take all the credit. I can probably take very little of it. Initially, when I started with the Compliance and Technical Assistance Program, it was a quantity versus quality. It was out of the question to consider doing a site visit because we didn't have the staffing. We probably have about the same number of people we had back in '95, but the belief was that we could better serve the regulated community by taking phone calls, primarily air permitting, also niche apps, and concerning volatile organic compounds. And along the way, we had done some site visits, but these were recognition programs dealing with a 5-star program, of which there are 5 levels, and you work up the levels to earn either 1 through 5 stars or the Governor's Awards for Environmental Excellence. But as far as what we have in terms of compliance assistance site visits, and as far as recorded history, we go back to 2002, and we have since that time, or at least until the end of December of 2017, we have done about 2,000 site visits. And since that time, we've had 29 people, and I show on the first slide one of those people. I learned a lot from the various people, my colleagues, who came and maybe introduced me to a different perspective on what to look at. In this case, it was looking at a flammable cabinet and looking at materials, some of which get stored in the back, and inadvertently you have a cleanup and people start discarding stuff that they had lost track of, and some of that material might end up being a hazardous waste. So, pardon me. So CTAP assists Indiana businesses with understanding and achieving compliance with state and federal environmental regulations. So what does this really mean? It's really a case by case, an individual by individual. What are their particular needs? Some of those are very specific, such as dry cleaners, and some of them are very broad. They want someone to look at what they're doing and give them an overview. So we're free of charge. We're not mandatory. They're not obligated to have us come in and teach them anything. And a lot of what I guess what I try to determine is what do they need from me? What can I provide them? And I like what Sara, and to some extent what Jenna had emphasized. You're building a trust. You're building a relationship. so that they could believe that you can provide them something they might need or that they need immediately. So how do I give that to them? How do they help them to understand what they need to do such that they can reconstruct that should they be visited by an inspector? So we do have one caveat, confidential unless evidence of clear and immediate danger. So I myself have not encountered that, but I know at least a couple of instances that has come up. But again, it has not affected me itself. And like I said, our visits can be very general or very limited in scope or very specific questions. So how do people become aware of us? We do have an online request. They can go online and they can type in a question and we can get back with them. And it may be an answer that we can provide by phone or by email, or it may turn out to be a site visit. We get a call. We can also get a call after a compliance inspection or prior to a compliance inspection, preferably prior to a compliance inspection, so that we can help someone prepare for that future visit whenever that might occur, whether it's a day to several years down the road. We have gone out to do what are called introductory site visits, where we might go to a business that we think might be affected. Maybe we believe they might need an air permit. They generate perhaps hazardous waste. Maybe they're subject to stormwater permitting. And we present in about a 2 to 5 minute period a little bit about what we do. We leave some information and we leave it up to them to get back with us. So how do I prepare for a site visit itself? What I end up doing is I will speak with the person that's requesting the visit and get as many details as possible. You know, what do you make? How do you make it? What do you store? I will also go online and I will emphasize this: whatever information I find or I obtain through our online services, I will share with the company and indicate where I have obtained it so that they know I'm not making it up. So I will look for any permits they may have had under their name or under prior names for that location. I'll look under our virtual file cabinet for past inspections. I'll look at site maps, and also I'll prepare a checklist. And the checklist had started off very broadly, just asking very basic questions. And that's kind of the nature of, you know, do you need an air permit? I will help you determine whether you need an air permit. But you can dig deeper than that. Not only do you need an air permit, but what particular rules would you need that might be incorporated into the air permit? And you can even delve in deeper than that. There may be rules of which the state of Indiana does not have delegated authority. Then what do you tell someone? How do you tell them what information they might need to prepare for a visit that might be made by EPA? So the checklist is interesting. I know with my involvement with the auto body, we started off with a very basic questionnaire. I kind of used that, or I kind of borrowed it, or basically took major parts of it and put it into my own checklist. I also found that as I went along, as I had visited or made visits to places, and one thing I didn't really mention is, as far as relationships, a big part of my relationships are with other parts of the agency. It could be a lot of it is with perhaps air inspectors or RCRA inspectors or water inspectors, or people who do sampling or testing itself. And that adds to my knowledge base. And that also adds to the questions I can ask. Now it gets into I have to determine, you know, how much is too much for this particular business that I'm visiting. If I think it's going to overwhelm them, I'll limit my questioning, or I'll limit the focus of the visit, and then acknowledge that at the time, and then indicate we can continue this once you've digested this and have come to some resolution, assuming there's some issue. So limited in scope, dry cleaning. So subpart M, yes, sorry. So a lot of that has to do with record keeping requirements and leak checks. And I've worked a lot with air inspections, in particular one air inspector who will make referrals to me. I also attempt to, as much as possible, to provide some of this information as far as documents they can use to check leaks. I've worked with the association, which was very beneficial, the Midwest Dry Cleaning and Laundry Association. They have been a partner since about 1995. And at that time, we did have that 5-star program to recognize certain businesses that achieved beyond or went beyond the simple adherence to the subpart M requirements. So I will meet with a dry cleaner and I will go over specific information that primarily deals with the leak check and repair records, which includes temperature or pressure records, the rolling 12-month total. Sometimes some of these compliance issues are really nitpicky kinds of calculations, as far as they didn't keep track of a perk purchase for a given month, or they stopped tracking that altogether. And some of these are ongoing issues, such as separator water, how to manage it effectively as a hazardous waste, through a wastewater treatment device, as in a misting device, or in some cases, discharging it down the sanitary sewer. And that caused some great heartache to our cleanup people, who thought that only exacerbated cleanup issues or potential cleanup issues. So I feel we have a great relationship with the dry cleaning industry, although lately I haven't had as much of a need as at present. I have probably spoken beyond or haven't advanced my slides. I apologize for that. Like I said, we worked a lot with the NESHAP. We also worked with RCRA. Many of these dry cleaners are conditionally exempt, so they don't necessarily have to report, but some of them may anyway, as a conditionally exempt small quantity generator of hazardous waste, which is also a very small quantity generator of hazardous waste. We did have a recognition program, which I did go out and I would verify that they met a certain level, as in a 3 or 4, and then, as you can read, each star built on the previous star requirements, with the 5th being the most prestigious, and that was primarily based on solvent mileage. So I remember we did a photo shoot at a dry cleaner who was also part of the 5-star program, and I haven't had occasion to meet with this person, but I know a big part of working in this industry is not only keeping records, but adhering to certain OSHA requirements as well, and then doing leak checks, and then being able to keep records of those leak checks. I also recommend, from the standpoint of organization, consolidation, and simplification, I usually recommend to a dry cleaner that they keep a 3-ring binder with partitions to separate their purchase receipts, their 12-month rolling total, their leak detection and repair. I'll even suggest that any repair receipts they have related to a particular leak they found, or a temperature exceedance or pressure exceedance, they keep a copy of that and that as well. And I indicate that after a particular visit by an air inspector, that they archive that, keeping everything after that date, unless there is some resolution of an issue that's necessary. That way, the fewer the records, the less onerous the visit's going to be when it's time for the inspector to come and look at records. And so I find that many times many businesses maybe they keep all their records, but they keep all those records with everything else. And they're not organized and they're difficult to find. And on top of that, you have the air inspector and you feel a little pressured. And so relieve yourself of that by organizing, keeping it simple, and thinning it out wherever possible. So as far as the archive, that doesn't mean necessarily getting rid of it, but keeping it on your premises, say like in a file folder or a box even. So I also worked with the metal finishing industry. Initially, that started off being the chrome kneeshap or chrome electroplating kneeshap, subpart N. And I find that even though there are a lot of issues or potential issues with the chrome kneeshap, and potentially now with the plating and polishing kneeshap and RCRA as far as hazardous waste, as far as say like the F6, F7, F8, and F9 hazardous waste, still I find a lot of the metal finishers usually operate some form of a wastewater treatment process. So part of my knowledge base is engaging with other associations in order to keep abreast of my level of knowledge. Also to be able to maintain contact with associations, so one of which is the National Association for Surface Finishing, of which many members are also a part of the wastewater, the Indiana Industrial Operators Association. So they see me over a number of years. They hear me, and they hear me repeatedly, and they hear the same message. And after a while, you start to believe this person is legitimate. They're real. They're not going to provide you something errantly. So I worked a lot with air, to some extent, somewhat with RCRA, but mostly with the air program itself as far as referrals. So I thought this was kind of funny. I stole it from I think a Region 9 presentation to the metal finishing industry regarding RCRA. This, I recall going out and doing a visit based on stormwater and just looking at containment. And again, anything I can use that will help me with a future presentation, such as today's, generally I will try to nab as much as possible. And again, another stormwater inspection. And so I will try to point these things out. I like to point out the good things and the not so good things. And in my case, and if I can find it before someone else finds it, or help them point out, maybe here are some things you may have overlooked inadvertently, and why should you not overlook this? Maybe there's a pathway to a body of water you didn't anticipate. What are some creative solutions to preventing stormwater contamination? So there are many creative ideas out there, and I can learn from them myself, and I will most gladly share what other people have come to resolve a particular problem and share that resolution with others. So when we go out and do visits, we make observations, and we will issue a letter. And so basically what I am saying in that letter is hopefully what someone would tell them. They would look at their records, they would look at their process, and they would either cite them for violating some federal standard or some state standard or not. And so my information to them in the form of the letter, making the observation and making references to that federal regulation or the state regulation, would be to help them not have that issue when they are visited by the inspector itself. Sometimes there are specific questions or there are issues that don't have an immediate resolution. and that may require me to actually seek their permission in writing to speak with an inspector regarding a specific interpretation. So, like I said, the quality assurance letter is basically just to make certain that what I'm saying is most likely what an air inspector or a waste inspector or any other inspector might say. Other areas which are a little gray area might deal with perhaps the spill prevention, countermeasure, and control, perhaps the EPCRA requirements, storage tanks itself. So, I mean, again, it gets back into how much time can I spend at a place without overwhelming the person in terms of providing them with the needed information so that they understand what it is and how to go about complying. And it may be more than one visit assistance, or it may be an ongoing relationship, as Sara indicated in her presentation earlier. So these are my resources, and hopefully you found what I had to say today informative.
Thank you, Mark. That was a lot of great information. Did anybody have any questions for Mark? I didn't see any up on the chat box. There were a couple of questions that Sara had directed to her that she answered through the chat that I'd like to get on the recording. So if you have a chance to ask any questions for Mark, go ahead and enter those in the chat now while I read these questions that came to Sara and the answers. One question was, Sara, how do you build trust with companies handling both the complaints and compliance assistance? And Sara answered, if a small business comes into compliance with me, no enforcement is necessary. Usually 50% of complaints work out that way. Then that small business becomes my client and they will contact me with questions later or help with paperwork. And then the second question that was on the chat, Sara, with complaints you respond to, do you get back with the compliance inspector? Also, on regular site visits, do you go back to the source to verify compliance? And Sara answered in chat, compliance referrals get 30 days to work with me, sometimes more depending on the issues. If compliance has not been met, compliance will go out and visit. If a site asks for assistance, I do follow up to see how things are going, either a phone call or an email to see what help they might need. Okay, it looks like those were all the questions that we had today. I really want to express my thanks to our three speakers for being willing to spend their time today to talk with us about their programs.